Welcome to the special GRIPS Forum today. Today, we have invited Mr. David O'Sullivan, who is the Chief Operating Officer of the European External Action Service. The European External Action Service supports the High Representative Vice President of the Commission, Ms. Cathy Ashton, in fulfilling her mandate to ensure the consistency of the Union's external action, which involves security, foreign policy, trade policy, and etc. And this is going to be regarded as a core body of a future common European foreign service. Mr. O'Sullivan was a Director General for Trade of the European Commission from 2005 to 2010. Previously, he was Secretary General of the European Commission from 2000 to 2005, Head of Cabinet of Commission President Romano Prodi, and Director General for Education and Training. He has also extensive experience in EU social and employment policy. Mr. O'Sullivan has a background in economics, graduating from Trinity College in Dublin, and having completed postgraduate studies at the College of Europe. So please, Mr. O'Sullivan.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you very much, Professor Machista, for this introduction, and to the Graduate Institute for Policy Studies for giving me this opportunity to speak to you about the priorities for EU diplomacy in East Asia. Before I go into that, I would like to begin by setting out the wider context, how we see trends in and around the region, and how these affect our policy options and choices. The starting point for any discussion of this type, of course, has to be a recognition that the rise, or rather the re-emergence of Asia, is one of the mega trends shaping our world. Asia is home to the world's fastest growing economies. It is experiencing rapidly changing political dynamics, and as a result, it has rising global significance and influence. As Japan knows well, growth rates around the region are of course affected by the global economic slowdown. But still, and in comparative terms, this region is full of energy and confidence. On the back of a decade and more of producing ever more impressive statistics on growth, trade, investment, science, and technology. You know the list. The key driving force behind all this has been that ever larger numbers of people in Asia have been able to satisfy that core human aspiration, to shape their own lives. The rise and changing shape of Asia is a systemic development, and it is quite literally changing our world. Since 1945, the role of the US in the region has been crucial, ensuring overall stability and security, including through its alliance with Japan. Recently, there's been much talk about the so-called Obama pivot, or now the rebalancing of US attention and resources from the wider Middle East to the Asia-Pacific. The reasons behind this rebalancing are obvious and have intrinsic logic. The overall stated aim, as you know, is to strengthen regional and multilateral structures to manage the big political and security changes that are underway, including the embedding of a rising China into a regional and global sets of norms and institutions. China is, of course, a crucial partner for all of us. Its growth rate has been phenomenal and well documented. Its regional and global impact is rising in tandem. As we speak, a new leadership in China is settling in, and it will have to grapple with a number of pressing internal challenges: corruption, pollution, growth, expectation management, to mention just a few. Elsewhere in the region, too, there have recently been important leadership changes. Here in Japan, of course, but also South Korea. and important elections are set to come in Pakistan, India, and Indonesia. So the overall landscape in Asia is changing fast, and we need to factor these changes into our policy deliberations. We all know that Asia has long contained some of the world's critical potential flashpoints: the Korean Peninsula, India-Pakistan, several territorial and maritime disputes, including those in the South China Sea and East Asia. What we are seeing, unfortunately, now is a rise in tensions everywhere. I could mention the latest missile test by the DPRK, or indeed the suspicion today of a nuclear test. Deadly border skirmishes between India and Pakistan last month. And almost every day there are new developments in the East and South China Sea. Arms sales across the region are rising, which is generally not a huge sign of people's confidence in overall regional security. It is significant that last year, for the first time, defense spending in Asia exceeded that of Europe. The striking thing in Asia are two parallel truths. Asia is characterized by deep economic integration in terms of production and supply chains, but also by deep underlying and indeed growing political and security tensions. To this, one must add the absence of an agreed and strong set of rules, norms, and institutions to manage these growing tensions. Nationalism is on the rise. Regional integration is under pressure, starting with ASEAN. Some point to the growing risks of a bipolar regional dynamic and a trend where security tensions are spilling over into the economic realm. Here in Japan, people of course remember how tensions last year with China over the East China Sea affected business in terms of car sales, flights, and so forth. All of this directly affects European interests, economically through our trade and investment relations. As you know, the EU is the world's biggest market and trading bloc. What fewer people know is that Asia has now surpassed NAFTA to become the EU's main trading partner, accounting for a third of total trade, and this figure continues to grow. China alone is the EU's second business trading partner after the United States. Japan and ASEAN as a group are in the top 5. In terms of investment, arguably a better indicator of health and the significance of an economic relationship, more than 26% of EU outward investment is going to Asia, while inward investment from Asia to Europe is growing fast. So Asia matters to Europe, and will do so even more in the future. In economic terms, we know that recovery at home depends on the ability to harness growth and to open new markets, many of which are in Asia. With South Korea, we have concluded a free trade agreement now in place since over a year, and which has boosted trade by several billion euro. We've just concluded a similarly ambitious FTA with Singapore, while talks are ongoing with India, Vietnam, and Malaysia. We are about to launch negotiations for an FTA with Japan and are in an exploratory phase with Thailand and Indonesia. But Asia also matters to Europe in political and security terms. We have 4 of our most important strategic partners in the region. The engagement of the biggest actors in Asia will be essential if we are to tackle global challenges such as climate change, piracy, non-proliferation, freedom of navigation in the South China Sea with 50% of world trade in tonnage passing through, Afghanistan after 2014. All these issues and challenges affect vital EU interests. So it is logical that the EU is building up its engagement in and with Asia. For the truth is that Europe also matters to Asia. Asia's future growth depends on access to our markets. The euro crisis has actually underlined our basic interdependence and our shared interest in promoting a global recovery. Despite the slow recovery of its economy from the financial crisis, the EU remains the largest economy in the world. with per capita GDP of 25,000 euros per head for its 500 million consumers. That represents an economy worth 12.6 trillion euros. Only the United States, at 11.5 trillion euros, is in the same league. The EU and its member states also remain the largest overall donor of official development aid, with around 53 billion euros per year. As Asia contains some of the world's poorest and most vulnerable countries, the enduring importance of Europe as a development partner is clear. Now, it is true that we, as the EU, don't have a leading role on the headline hard security issues, given the absence of major military assets or bases in the region. But in a way, this is perhaps also an advantage. The region doesn't necessarily need another hard security player. Our value added is different. We are seen as engaged but not threatening, active but without a geopolitical agenda. Perhaps the greatest value of the EU is to act as a principal champion of a rules-based cooperative security. For all its faults, and I will admit that we do have some, the EU is seen by many as a model for reconciliation and regional integration. The single market remains a huge pole of attraction. We have steadily enlarged a rule-based community of democracies from 6 to 12 to 15 to 25 to 27 and soon to be 28 when Croatia joins as the 28th member in July of this year. Our inclusive approach to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law strikes a chord with a growing number of democracies, from established ones like Japan and India to newer ones like Korea and Indonesia. It was, I think, in recognition of what the EU has contributed to peace, reconciliation, and reunification of the continent that we were awarded the Nobel Prize for Peace last year. I note that we weren't awarded the Nobel Prize for Economics, but I'm confident we'll get that the year after next. I also think that as the EU, we have a good track record of innovative, integrated strategies on the new security issues that are increasingly dominating the international agenda. The way we operate internally and hence project externally is perhaps not very glamorous. Our rhetoric is rarely stirring. We don't do shock and awe, but that's also the point. We do things others sometimes find difficult, and we do things in a different way. Before comprehensive strategies, or the 3 Ds, defense, diplomacy, development, became fashionable, we were already doing it. Take our approach on piracy, where we not only have a very successful naval operation, Atalanta, off the coast of Somalia, but are active both on and offshore with training, capacity building, judicial reform, working with regional partners, and development assistance. Everyone knows that in the next 10 years, we'll have to spend much more attention on problems of scarcity, partly driven by climate change, energy, and natural resources, including rare earths. And these will be much debated and in some cases contested, especially where access is politicized. Cybersecurity is another obvious growth area, I fear. For none of these is there a military solution, nor is it a question of just getting the markets to work. Neither will traditional development policy be the answer. The problems are more complex and more interconnected. They require more creative thinking about security, bringing together different constellations of countries, organizations, and people. Whatever weaknesses we may have, this is a core EU strength. So framing these kind of integrated solutions forms a growing part of our engagement with and in Asia. Doing things differently, addressing security challenges the modern way. If this is the bigger backdrop and the overall thrust of EU engagement, allow me to run quickly through some of the more concrete things the EU has been doing recently. For us, 2012 was a year in which we were in which there was a step change in the EU's engagement in and with the Asia-Pacific region, both in terms of presence and in terms of policies. Key milestones included an unprecedented number of visits by the presidents of the European Council and Commission, President Van Rompuy and President Barroso, but also High Representative Cathy Ashton, who was in the region 5 times in 1 year, and various European commissioners. 4 bilateral Asian summits, including 2 with China in 1 year, but also with Korea and India. With Japan, we will have the first summit of 2013 with an Asian partner, hopefully in the next month or so. The ASEM summit last November was attended by more than 35 heads of state and government, thus proving the enduring importance both Asians and Europeans attach to their informal dialogue. The High Representative Cathy Ashton chaired the Brunei Ministerial, charting a new course for EU-ASEAN relations, both more ambitious and more political at the same time. At the same occasion, she signed the EU's accession to the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation and represented the EU at the ASEAN Regional Forum. On the same occasion, there was a joint EU-US statement on cooperation in and with the Asia-Pacific region, signed by Cathy Ashton and Secretary of State Clinton. We have taken a very forward-leaning approach to support the transition in Myanmar. We have also taken policy initiatives with India and others to cooperate on new security issues, in particular piracy and cyber terrorism, as well as ongoing negotiations to deepen our formal relations through a series of partnership and cooperation agreements and framework agreements with a number of countries in the region. Thus, we have not just heeded the persistent calls, not least from Asians themselves, for greater EU presence, but we've also begun to implement more creative, joined-up policy making. For this year, we intend to keep up the momentum. With respect to our strategic partners, we intend to launch negotiations for a free trade agreement and a framework political agreement with Japan at the next summit. The 16th summit with China, likely to be held in the autumn, will be the first one with the new Chinese leadership. Engaging that new leadership and developing our efforts on regional and international issues, market access, investment, but also issues of common concern, such as urbanization or water and energy security, will all be hugely important. The EU is strongly committed to the EU-China Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. In common with many other international actors, the EU is active in engaging China in an interdependent way. With the Republic of Korea, we will be celebrating 50 years of diplomatic relations, which will be a good occasion to deepen the political relationship further. On a number of crucial issues, such as counter-piracy, green growth, or modern development policy, South Korea is a very dynamic player with considerable assets. With India, we aim to finalize the negotiations for an ambitious FTA, as well as further building up the political and security dimension of our relationship, where we are steadily expanding our cooperation on counterterrorism, counter-piracy, cybersecurity. With respect to Afghanistan, the state building we are engaged in remains the main avenue to promote stability and prepare the post-2014 transition. The EU and its member states are supporting the transition in Afghanistan with more than €1 billion a year. Regarding Pakistan, crucial elections are expected this spring, in which we hope to see one civilian democratic government being succeeded by another civilian democratically elected government. This will be an important milestone. The EU Election Observation Mission will play an important role in supervising these elections. The EU is particularly active in supporting reforms in the justice sector in Pakistan and with expanding cooperation in counter-terrorism, counter-radicalization, and non-proliferation. With Myanmar, the EU's main objective is to deepen support for the political reform process underway, working both with the government, President Thein Sein will be visiting Brussels in early March, and the opposition. Concrete avenues include EU support in the area of ethnic peace, the restoration of the generalized system of preferences, where a formal proposal is now working its way through our legislative process and which will grant Myanmar full duty-free, quota-free access to the European market. A decision at the end of April on the now suspended sanctions and the mapping of our assistance for the all-important 2015 elections. Finally, we are upgrading our office to a full delegation or diplomatic embassy in Yangon. Before turning to the EU's engagement and objectives for the various regional forums, let me say a word about EU-Japan relations. Japan is a natural partner for the EU. We are democracies, we share common values and interests, we are largely civilian powers, but are increasingly willing to deploy military assets abroad for peace and stability. We believe in rules-based, effective multilateralism to respond to global challenges such as climate change and sustainable development. Given our combined economic weight and international standing, we have a common interest and responsibility to show joint leadership on these issues. We have not always been able to translate this closeness into joint positions and concrete actions, showing that there is much untapped potential in the relationship. At the May 2011 EU-Japan summit, leaders decided comprehensively to strengthen all aspects of the EU-Japan relationship. This means not only a free trade agreement, but also a comprehensive agreement on political, global, and sectoral cooperation, what we like to call a framework agreement. Negotiations for these two agreements have not yet started, but in November, EU member states indicated their interest in launching such negotiations, and this will hopefully take place at the next EU-Japan summit, as I said, to take place in a matter of weeks. In view of common difficulties in a challenging global economic and financial environment, we should work hard to see if we can give what has the potential to be a major boost to reviving our economies. Such a framework agreement would recognize the already good level of cooperation between the EU and Japan in a whole host of political, global, and technical matters, and provide the architecture for both sides to deepen this interaction considerably in the future. Following the March 2011 Great East Japan earthquake, we have collaborated in the fields of nuclear safety and are preparing to embark on a new joint action in the area of humanitarian assistance. In the security field, the EU has anti-piracy expertise and has deployed assets to the Indian Ocean, which are operating in parallel with Japan's own vessels in the region, an exercise that is mutually reinforcing our common interest in keeping vital sea lanes open. Indeed, this issue was included in Prime Minister Abe's inaugural speech, and it would be a natural topic for the EU and Japan to explore closer cooperation. As we have seen in the recent terrorist attack on a gas complex in Algeria, both our citizens face new, complex, and transnational threats in what used to be safe parts of the world. I express my condolences to the families of the 10 dead Japanese nationals in a crisis that saw the deaths of at least 39 foreign hostages. This incident shows the importance of close international cooperation in a crisis situation, the effective sharing of information in a common effort amongst us to bolster counterterrorism capabilities, especially in the countries most at risk. In this context, we welcome Japan's indication that it wishes to support the international effort to bring stability to Mali by supporting refugee and humanitarian activity. Both the EU and Japan have a common interest in ensuring the dismantlement of Iran and North Korea's nuclear weapons programs. Cooperation in non-traditional security threats, notably cybersecurity, should be developed further given both our dependence on information technology systems. In the area of development policy cooperation, the EU and Japan have both played key roles in the change we are seeing in Burma, Myanmar, and must continue to align our positions closely if we are to have maximum possible impact on the emerging democracy. Given its own DNA and the importance we attach to strengthening the regional architecture, the EU is keen to play a very active role in the various regional fora of Asia. A central part of this agenda is to step up our engagement with ASEAN. Like Japan, we believe that a united and self-confident ASEAN, proceeding with its own integration and able to transcend binary strategic choices, is good for regional stability, security, and prosperity, and hence good for us. We feel we have certain experience to share as like-minded integration project. We can explain what works and also what does not work. Therefore, we are offering technical and financial support as they seek to realize specific integration goals across the three communities, and specifically their goal of having an integrated economic community by 2015. Connectivity, as you know, is one of their key mobilizing concepts, and it is an area where the EU is in quite a unique place to be a peer supporter. Not a service provider, but a knowledge provider, helping to set up the policy framework or ways of innovative financing. We are particularly keen to expand cooperation on non-traditional security issues such as disaster response, where the EU is supporting the ASEAN Humanitarian Assistance Center. We are also working with ASEAN on modern border management and maritime cooperation. As we scale up this relationship, we are mindful, like Japan, of the need also to strengthen the ASEAN Secretariat. Linked to all of this is a set of activities we are developing in the context of the ASEAN Regional Forum, for instance on disaster management and the major exercise that is being prepared to take place in Thailand in May, but also on preventive diplomacy. We often hear from our Asian friends and partners, including here in Japan, that they wish to see greater EU engagement and presence in the area of Asian political and security affairs. My answer is, we do too, and we are doing that. Because it is in our interest to do so, and because we believe that we have a particular contribution to make to the evolving regional security architecture. We have a profound economic interest in the prosperity of this region, but we also have a profound security interest in the peace and stability of the region. For this reason, we are upping our presence wherever we can, bilaterally and regionally, including where the EU is at present not a member, such as the East Asia Summit, and where we count on all those that call for greater EU engagement to help facilitate that. I would like to end with something that Kevin Rudd once said that struck a chord in a speech he gave in New York in January 2012. He said, "Asia is home to all the world's hopes for the 21st century global economy, while handicapped by all the rigidities of an almost 19th century set of territorial and security policy disagreements. This is no doubt true, but the key thing is also that this can be remedied. It will, of course, be for Asians to find their own architecture as to how best to manage these tensions, but we as the European Union have a huge stake in helping to build a robust, multilateral and rules-based security order in Asia. We have very relevant experience and assets to offer, and it is manifestly in our common interest to do so." Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Sullivan. My name is Ozeki. I'm a student here, but I also work for a newspaper called the Yomiuri Shimbun. It's a Japanese newspaper. And I have to ask you a question as a reporter. You mentioned the nuclear testing by the North Korea today. You mentioned suspected nuclear testing, but the North Korean Central News Agency about 3 hours ago officially confirms that they did succeed in miniaturized nuclear testing or something. And my question is, what will be the response of the European Union and what should be the response of the international community? That's my first question. And my second question is, what's your assessment or evaluation of the UN Security Council sanctions that have been adopted in the previous nuclear testings and missile launching? Thank you.
Well, thank you. I didn't, when I was speaking, I had only heard that it was a suspected nuclear testing, and of course you tell me, but of course I can't personally confirm that North Korea has said it was in fact a nuclear test. I think this is extremely unhelpful and not a development that the international community can approve of. We had already put in place sanctions, and the European Union had already aligned itself on the UN sanctions and indeed taken some additional sanctions. And I think we will now have to reflect on the consequences of this latest development and decide what is the best way to respond. I would just point out that in the case, for example, of Iran, the sanctions which have been imposed at some huge cost also to the European Union were responsible or considered responsible by many people of bringing Iran back to the negotiating table, and it is Cathy Ashton, the High Representative Vice President, who is leading the international community negotiations with Iran in order to find a solution to the potential military nature of Iran's nuclear program. So I think that sanctions can be the right way forward, but I'm sure the international community will want to digest and take stock of what has happened and then decide what is the best response to give.
My name is Glenn Fukushima. I'm currently with the Center for American Progress in Washington, D.C., a think tank. It's good to see you again.
Hi.
My first question is, what are the biggest lessons, both positive and negative, that East Asia should derive from the European experience in integration? And number two, what is your assessment of what can be achieved in the next 4 years with the Obama administration's pivot or rebalance to Asia? Thank you.
Well, I mean, I think there are two distinct European experiences. Obviously, there is the EU, which has been about building from the European Economic Community of the 50s through to the European Union with 28 members in 2013, which is clearly a project not only of economic integration but of political integration, leading indeed to a single currency, to a single market, and increasingly to attempts to have common foreign and security policies. This is a very deep integration project, which I would say you should only undertake if everyone is committed to doing it. It's a demanding process, and I would say that the biggest lesson that I would learn from it is the strength of the institutions. I think if the European project has succeeded in the way it has, it is because the treaties foresaw very strong, centrally based institutions, a European Commission, which is the executive, which is empowered to make proposals and to enforce legislation. Then a sort of bicameral system of a European Parliament, which is directly elected, which provides democratic legitimacy and oversight, and a Council of Ministers, which jointly with the European Parliament adopts legislation, plus a European Court of Justice and the recognition of the primacy of European law over national law. And so the ultimate Supreme Court of the European Union is the European Court of Justice, which interprets disputes over interpretation of the law and which is then applied across the whole territory of the Union. And I think it is the creation of these strong central institutions which is the unique feature of the European Union compared to other international organizations or even regional integration projects such as ASEAN or Mercosur, who are probably the two obvious examples that might come to mind. So I think if you want a regional integration project to succeed, you absolutely have to have strong centralized institutions tasked with promoting the global interest and not the narrow national interest, and capable of providing an independent role relative to the individual constituent states. What would I say are the things we've done wrong? Well, we've probably done lots of things wrong, but I think the one thing I would say is we have perhaps neglected the need to keep public opinion on board with what is happening. The need to continuously build up popular support for the project. We suffer in Europe, I think, from the syndrome that national politicians very often tend to take the credit for anything positive that comes out of Brussels as somehow being the result of their efforts, and being too easily willing to blame Brussels for some of the negative, because there's always, when you have an integration process, there's always give and take. It's like a trade agreement. There are some benefits, but there are also some costs. But I think many of our national politicians have fallen into the habit of, if something good comes out of Brussels, they say, well, this is because I was in Brussels and I won this and I got them to do this. And then when something goes wrong, they will say, well, actually, this wasn't my fault. Those people in Brussels have decided it. So somewhere along the line, people get the impression that the bad news comes out of Brussels and the good news comes out of national ministers. And I think we're now paying a price for this in terms of a certain amount of disconnect between popular opinion and the integration process, which I think needs very close attention in the coming years, particularly because one consequence of the euro crisis is undoubtedly going to be that we're going to need even closer integration. And we need to be absolutely sure that we can bring public opinion and that there is a sense of democratic accountability in that process. You should really ask an American what I expect from the 4 years of the Obama administration in Asia. I think it's perfectly natural that America is pivoting, if you like, towards the Asia-Pacific. America is an Asia-Pacific country. And I think it has a very important role to play in this region, and what happens in this region is of huge importance for the United States. So I would imagine that they're going to pay a lot of attention to this region. Of course, don't underestimate the importance of the transatlantic relationship either. The fact is that the transatlantic economic corridor is still the single biggest economic corridor in the world. And a figure I sometimes like to remind people, American companies make more out of their investments in Belgium than they do from their investments in China. So I think America is quite capable of facing both ways and having a strong commitment to this region, which is of vital importance, but maintaining also a strong transatlantic dimension. And I think if we do decide to launch free trade negotiations between the EU and the US, this will only be further reinforced. But for me, this will actually complement what is happening in the Pacific region with the TPP. And basically, hopefully, I'm a strong believer in the WTO and multilateralism, but I'm afraid that the Doha round didn't make it. Maybe if we have the TPP and we have a transatlantic free trade agreement, somehow we can connect the dots and bring it all back to Geneva and multilateralize it, which would actually be the best thing for all of us.
Thank you very much, gentlemen.
My name is Hayashi from Japan External Trade Organization. Thank you very much for your strong commitment to Asia, and particularly for me who pursued the economic integration agreement with EU. Your engagement, you mentioned your commitment to Asia, and particularly to the framework agreement or FTA with Japan is really appreciated. But one thing I would like to ask you is concerning the unity of Europe. Just you mentioned that, of course, there are some difference in the popular views and also the union's views. But now the urgent issue is the UK's position. I think Mr. Cameron proposed the national referendum, and I'm wondering whether really the existing unity of Europe can be continued under this, condition. And another thing is when you overcome
the present fiscal or financial crisis of EU, well, can you really imagine the fiscal sort of union in the EU? Because for us, there seem to be some divergent views on the part of European countries, Germany and other countries. Well, we are wondering, because we are expecting the very strong EU, but we are wondering whether this unity is really possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you. On the UK, I'm absolutely convinced that the UK is going to remain in the European Union for a very long time. I appreciate that there is a difficult debate domestically in the UK. There is a rise of what we call Euroscepticism. This is particularly prevalent in the party of Mr. Cameron, and so he has a particularly challenging domestic political situation to manage. But I think the speech which he famously gave a few weeks ago should be noted precisely for what it said about the importance of the European Union to the UK, about the importance of the UK remaining actively engaged. Now, he has announced that if re-elected in 2014, he will hold a referendum in 2017 on the basis of some new arrangements for the UK's participation in the EU, which he hopes to negotiate between now and then. We will see what that means and how it translates. And I would point out that the referendum will be in 2017. I would just remind you that in 1975, shortly after the UK joined the EU, or the EEC as it then was, there was a similar situation. There was a rise of discontentment, there was a popular reaction, and a referendum was held. And in the run-up to the referendum, the majority was strongly against membership of the EU. The net result was a strong victory in favor of staying in the EU. I remain convinced that if a future referendum is held, the same outcome will be the case. I believe that every country in Europe understands that scale will count in the 21st century. If Europe wants to be an actor and wants to play a role in shaping the 21st century, we can only do it by acting collectively as the EU, which gives us weight, which gives us influence. Individually, even our largest member states will not be able to have that impact acting on their own. And I think that is deeply understood by our leaders, but also by our citizens, even if they sometimes are not completely happy with one or other aspect of European Union policy. You ask me, will there be fiscal union in the EU? I think that those who a year ago were predicting the breakup of the Eurozone, the breakup even of the EU, have been proven wrong. I constantly believed that they were wrong. I never thought there was the slightest risk at any stage of a breakup of the Eurozone. I can think of no circumstance in which it would be in a country's interest to leave the Eurozone. And indeed, we have countries queuing up to join the Eurozone. The Euro has been a fantastically successful project, which has brought 10 years of unprecedented economic stability, growth, job creation to Europe. Now, it is true that the design, I won't say it was flawed, but the design was incomplete. We created a monetary union without the complete complement of budgetary coordination. We now realize the mistake of that, and we fixed it. We have put in place a very strict system of European multilateral surveillance of national budgets, which will mean that never again will it be possible for countries to have widely diverging deficits and financial overhang. We are also in the process of putting together a banking union because, of course, all of this started with the financial crisis and then fed into the situation of the banks, and we're in the process of fixing that by having a banking union. And I believe that in due course we will have some kind of fiscal union because I believe that that's an indispensable complement to the system. But I don't believe that I mean, I really don't believe that to have a successful currency union, that you need a federal state. I believe that you can have, there is an intermediate position, which is short of a federal state, which still leaves very strong room for maneuver to individual countries to manage their own affairs, while still being part of a currency union. I believe that the initial design of the euro was insufficient. I think we are now in the process of fixing it. I believe we will go on to recover from this crisis, and the structural reforms which are being forced upon many countries as a result of the crisis will make our economies more competitive, much stronger, and I believe, as Asia did from the '97 crisis, we will emerge from this crisis much stronger and Europe will bounce back. Never forget that when you look at some of the fundamentals, our debt to GDP ratio on average in Europe is 82%. In the United States, it's 103%. In Japan, I'm afraid it's 230%, even if I recognize that in Japan, you mostly owe the money to yourselves rather than to foreigners. And as I say, we are the largest economy in the world, and we have for 10 years run a healthy surplus in manufactured products. And we have held our share of world trade very steady at 20% over the last 10 years, while both Japan and the United States have seen their share of world trade drop considerably. Europe is still a good place to do business. It's still a competitive manufacturing producer of competitive goods, and we can still compete with the best in the world. We have many problems to fix. We have serious issues of unemployment. We have serious issues for specific countries that need to be addressed, but these are being addressed, and I'm very confident that when this period through which we've passed over the last 2 years and probably will last another year or so, when we come through this, we will have fixed our problems, we will have strengthened our economy, and we will go on to continue to be one of the most important areas of economic activity in the world.
Thank you very much, Mr. O'Sullivan, for your comprehensive speech. My name is Ueta, professor at the International Christian University, and former ambassador, deputy chief of the mission of Japan to the EU some time ago. In my view, EU is most welcome in Asia in order to build a rule-based society or community. And my question today is on the prospect for the EU-US Comprehensive Trade Agreement and its implication for EU-Japan EPA or FTA. Thank you very much.
Well, as most of you probably know, we have been engaged over the last 18 months in discussions with the United States authorities, a high-level working group chaired by Commissioner de Gucht on the one hand and by Mike Froman, the Deputy National Security Advisor in Washington on the other, which is going to produce recommendations on the prospects for a free trade agreement between the US and the EU. We expect this report to be issued shortly, and then we will see what the recommendations are and whether the two authorities on both sides of the Atlantic decide to engage in a free trade negotiation. I think there is a good possibility that this will be the outcome, but nothing is decided yet. I think there are compelling economic reasons in favor of such a negotiation. I mentioned earlier the importance of the transatlantic corridor. We remain our respective most important trading partners, but most importantly, the huge amount of investment interpenetration between the United States and Europe is absolutely remarkable. The amount of jobs in Europe that depend on American investment and the amount of jobs in America that depend on European investment is very, very significant. I also think that we have rather unnecessary regulatory barriers between our two economies, which, if dismantled, would add considerably to GDP on both sides of the Atlantic. So I think we would stand to gain, both of us, from such a negotiation. It will not be easy. It will be a difficult negotiation, precisely because many of the issues will focus on regulatory questions, and there the autonomy of regulators on both sides of the Atlantic will have to in some way be compromised if we are to arrive at joint standards or some mutual recognition of standards in order to dismantle these regulatory barriers. And we know how sensitive these issues are politically and even amongst public opinion. But I believe it would be possible to have such a negotiation and to make a success of it. And if we did, then the EU would become, we are just about to close a negotiation with Canada. We already have a free trade agreement with Mexico. We are on the other side about to close our agreement with India. We're about to launch and hopefully succeed in concluding a negotiation with Japan. If you then look at the map, you will find that that will make the EU the hub of the largest free trading area ever seen in the world. And not to mention the agreements which we have, for example, the duty-free, quota-free access which we give to all the developing countries. We are the only major trading global trader who offers full duty-free, quota-free access to all least developed countries. So this will turn Europe into the hub of the largest free trade area ever seen. I would hope that at some point, as I said earlier, this would be multilateralized. I worked for 5 years on the Doha Development Agenda, 5 years of my life lost that I'll never get back again, and I don't feel I contributed very much to global trade. But I'm a profound believer in the WTO and in the superiority of multilateral outcomes over bilateral. But given the difficulties in Geneva at the present time, I think bilateral trade deals are the best way to continue with market opening. But I think at some point we need to go back to Geneva and multilateralize all of these bilateral deals and have a true global multilateral system of free trade, which would be the best solution for all of us. But in the meantime, hopefully we can conclude as many of these bilateral deals as possible and continue with the process of market opening and liberalization of trade, which is absolutely indispensable to the prosperity of all of us in the 21st century.
My name is Kumiko Haba, a professor of Aoyama Gakuin University. And my question is relevant to the China-EU relation. You didn't mention so much about China-EU, but many people know the EU-China relation, especially in economically, primary important. But there is a merit and demerit. However, there is a security problem in Asia, China and other East Asian countries. So how do you think about the EU-China relation in economically and security, merit and demerit? And how do you think to conquer such a demerit situation to more effective situation? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think we all agree that the emergence, or indeed the re-emergence, I think it's important to remind ourselves that I think it was at the beginning of the 18th century that India and China were the two largest economies in the world. It's important to remind ourselves that we're only seeing a return to a situation which existed many hundreds of years ago, that China is emerging as first and foremost an economic power, and that this is going to be one of the major driving forces of the 21st century, simply because of the scale. As I said earlier, 1.3 or 1.4 billion people, this is massive, and whatever those people decide to do has a huge impact. The consumption pattern they follow, the environmental standards they set themselves, their demand for natural resources, for carbon fuels, is all going to have a huge impact for food, for water, is going to have a huge impact globally. And it is equally clear that with economic power comes political influence. And the question we are all asking is, what is China going to do with this political influence, and how is it going to behave as a global citizen? I remain fundamentally optimistic. I agree completely with Chris Patten, the former governor of Hong Kong and a former European Commissioner for External Relations, who said the only thing that should frighten us more than a successful China would be an unsuccessful China. And I agree completely that we have a great stake in the successful transformation of China, which has started 20 years ago and which is destined to continue. We have a very good relationship with China. We are China's largest export market, and China is rapidly becoming one of our largest export markets. We also have a lot of investment relations. We have a lot of European investment in China. We are starting to see some Chinese investment in Europe. We are proposing now to conclude an investment treaty between the EU and China, which we think would be an important step forward to provide a firm platform for increasing investment. But we have our issues with China. Human rights is a big issue and a controversial issue between us. We have a good security dialogue with China, discussing matters of common concern globally and throughout the region. But again, we have differences of opinion. We do not agree with China's position on Syria, for example, which aligns themselves with Russia in a way that we feel is not helpful to finding a solution to the tragedy of Syria. On the other hand, in the case of Iran, China has been extremely supportive of Cathy Ashton's efforts to push Iran into more transparency about the true intentions of its nuclear program. So, and on the issue of immediate concern here about the South China Sea, and we have made it very clear and stated publicly that while we take no position on the territorial disputes, because this is for individual countries concerned to sort it out, we call firmly for all of this to be managed in a peaceful and diplomatic way and in full respect of international law, in particular the United Nations Law of the Sea. And we send that message to China as we send that message to everyone involved in these discussions. So I think we have a good relationship with China. China is going to challenge us all as it emerges or re-emerges not only as an economic player but also as a political and diplomatic player. But I remain confident that China will over time play an important and constructive role in international relations. But this will also need firm multilateral structures in order to make sure that we have a global architecture that enables us to ensure that we work by the rule of law and by diplomacy and not by other means.
All right. We've learned from Mr. O'Sullivan how Europe and Asia have been cooperating together, and also how we are going to cooperate together. I sincerely hope that Mr. O'Sullivan will continue to make a great contribution to our collaborations in the future. And those who are in Asia, will continue to make effort to make EU-Asia relationship stronger. I also would like to, I very much look forward to our future friendship. And you said Miss Ashton has come to Asia 5 times in 1 year. And I hope you will keep coming back to Asia. And I hope you come back to Asia at least 6 times in 1 year. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today. And please join me in thanking Mr. O'Sullivan for great speech today. Thank you very much.